20 years ago, my mother had been one of the most celebrated dancers in the country. People said that whenever she stepped onto the stage, even the spotlight seemed to dim beside her. But after she died, everything connected to dance became forbidden in our home. My stepmother claimed she didn't want to live under the shadow of a dead woman. So there was no music, no ballet shoes, no costumes, and absolutely no mention of my mother. Most importantly, I was forbidden from dancing. To prove his love for his new wife, my father personally confiscated all of my dance clothes. Then, right in front of me, he tore apart my acceptance letter to the Royal Academy of Dance. The pieces of paper scattered onto the floor, like my future being ripped into shreds. That same night, I smashed a window and ran away. Blood covered my palms, but it hurt far less than being abandoned by my own family. I changed my name, changed my identity, and from that day on, I never returned to that house again. 20 years later, I sat in the center seat of the Royal Academy's entrance examination panel as the chief judge. The doors to the audition hall slowly opened. A young woman walked in wearing a stunning white performance dress. Beautiful, proud, and strangely enough, she looked a little like me. She bowed politely. "Good afternoon, judges. My name is Charlotte Sinclair." The moment I heard that name, the pen in my hand froze. Charlotte Sinclair. Only one word different from the name I had abandoned years ago. Clara Sinclair. I lowered my eyes and opened her file. Under the section labeled Father, there it was. The name I had hated for more than 20 years. Edward Sinclair. So the so-called forbidden memories back then had only applied to me, the daughter who had lost her real mother. The music began. Charlotte started dancing. Every movement was flawless. The elegance in her posture, the emotion in her eyes, the rhythm in every step, all painfully reminded me of my mother. The entire room fell silent. No one could find a single mistake. But I calmly picked up my pen and wrote 2 cold words across the score sheet. Failed. The giant screen updated instantly. Charlotte's face turned pale. The confidence in her eyes trembled violently. She bit down hard on her lip. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall. She bowed deeply toward the judge's table. "Ma'am, could you please tell me where I went wrong?" Her voice shook badly. "I can dance again. Please, give me one more chance." The vice judge beside me immediately panicked. He lowered his microphone and whispered frantically, "Judge Evans, that's Edward Sinclair's daughter. Last month, the Sinclair Group donated an entire experimental theater to this academy. You can't give her a score like that." I didn't even raise my eyes. I simply looked at the girl standing beneath the stage lights. Today, I am the chief judge. In this room, I decide who stays and who leaves. No explanations, no arguments. Next applicant. Charlotte's face went completely white, but she didn't cry, didn't throw a tantrum. She simply crouched down quietly, picked up the folding fan she had used during her performance, and bowed to me once more. As she walked out of the audition hall, that lonely, restrained figure somehow made my chest ache too. The remaining auditions ended in a suffocating atmosphere. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, a tall shadow blocked the light. A middle-aged man dressed like a butler emerged from the darkness. He smiled politely, though there was no warmth in his eyes. "Miss Evans, correct? Our chairman would like a word." My eyes swept over the Sinclair Group emblem pinned to his chest. If this is about the girl who failed, then there's nothing to discuss. The smile on his face disappeared instantly. "Miss Evans, you're young to have climbed to the position of chief judge. You must be a smart woman. In this industry, talent alone isn't enough. You also need to understand how the world works." He stepped closer. "Mr. Sinclair has very high expectations for his daughter. The score you gave today has narrowed your own future. If you revise it now, the Sinclair family can guarantee your promotion next year. But if you insist on being difficult, I'm afraid there won't be room for someone like you in the North City arts world." I suddenly laughed, then deliberately raised my voice. "What's this? A butler from the Sinclair family, trying to interfere with the national entrance examination." The crowded hallway instantly exploded with whispers. Parents and students all turned to stare. Some even secretly raised their phones to record. The butler's expression changed immediately. Clearly, he hadn't expected me to expose everything publicly. "Claire Evans! Don't push your luck!" Furious, he reached out to grab my arm. I instantly snatched the fire extinguisher off the wall and pointed it straight at his face. "One more step, and you'll find out exactly how dry chemical powder tastes." "Security? There's someone threatening an examiner on the 3rd floor." The hallway erupted into chaos. "So that's the Sinclair heiress? They're trying to buy off the judges? This is insane! That judge is fearless!" Cold sweat formed on the butler's forehead as more cameras pointed toward him. Finally, he gritted his teeth. "Fine. We'll see about this." When I pushed open my office door, the heavy scent of expensive tea filled the room. The vice dean was sitting in my chair. On the table rested a sandalwood box. Inside it was a priceless antique dance manuscript, a collector's item money could barely buy. The vice dean calmly sipped his tea. "Claire, it's good for young people to have principles, but if you're too rigid, you break easily." He pointed toward the box. The Sinclair family has invested a lot into this academy. Mr. Sinclair specifically purchased this manuscript for you. As long as you revise Charlotte's score, this manuscript is yours, and next year's department chair position will be yours too. I walked over slowly, picked up the manuscript, weighed it in my hand. A satisfied smile appeared in his eyes. Then, I threw it straight into the trash can. You! The vice dean shot to his feet, trembling with rage. Claire Evans, don't be so ungrateful. I can remove you as chief examiner tomorrow. I simply smiled coldly, then pulled out my phone and pressed play. The recording of his bribery and threats echoed clearly throughout the office. His face turned deathly pale. I looked directly into his eyes. Vice Dean, what do you think would happen if this recording reached the Education Disciplinary Committee? How long would you keep your position then? His face shifted between red and white. For several long seconds, he pointed at me without saying a word. In the end, he could only grit his teeth, slam the office door shut, and leave in humiliation. The room had barely been quiet for 10 minutes when sharp high heels suddenly echoed down the hallway. Bang! The office door was kicked open. A woman dressed in luxury brands and dripping in jewelry stormed inside. Victoria Sinclair. My stepmother. 20 years had passed, yet time had barely touched her face. Money had preserved her perfectly. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled with contempt. So you're the blind fool. Who dared to fail my daughter? She marched straight toward my desk. Without another word, she raised her hand to slap me. But I simply tilted my head slightly and avoided it with ease. At the same time, I grabbed her wrist and pushed her backward. Ah! Victoria stumbled, then crashed onto the sofa, her face twisted in fury. How dare you touch me? I'm Edward Sinclair's wife. Do you believe I can ruin your life in North City with a single sentence? I looked down at her coldly. The authority of Mrs. Sinclair truly is impressive. Unfortunately, this is a public university, not the Sinclair family's private backyard. Victoria nearly exploded with rage. She grabbed the teacup on my desk and hurled it at me. Crash! The porcelain shattered against the wall behind me. At that exact moment, the campus police officers rushed in after hearing the commotion. What's happening here? I calmly adjusted my sleeve, then pointed toward the shattered pieces on the floor. Officer, this woman forced her way into an examiner's office, attempted to use intimidation to alter an entrance exam result, and physically attacked me. Victoria's face instantly changed. She's lying. But before she could finish, voices erupted outside the office. A crowd of parents and students had already gathered. Some were even live streaming the scene. Oh my god, that's Mrs. Sinclair? They're actually trying to pressure the judges? This is disgusting. Victoria's expression grew uglier by the second. She had come intending to use power and status to crush me, but instead, everything had exploded publicly in front of countless witnesses. One of the officers stepped forward. Ma'am, please cooperate. This is an official examination area. If you continue causing trouble, we'll be forced to file a formal report. Victoria glared at me viciously. Hatred practically burned in her eyes. Claire Evans, you think leaving the Sinclair family 20 years ago means you escaped us? The moment she said those words, my chest tightened slightly. 20 years ago, I had stood outside that mansion in the pouring rain, crying until my throat went raw. And the man I called father had chosen to hold another little girl in his arms instead. He had looked at me and said, your stepmother's daughter is your sister too. Can't you give in just a little? From that day onward, I understood something clearly. Inside that house, I would always be the outsider. I looked at Victoria quietly. I never tried to escape the Sinclair family. I simply realized, none of you deserved a place in my life anymore. Victoria froze. For a moment, she actually seemed shaken by my calmness. Then suddenly she sneered. Claire Evans, you really think you've won? Do you know why Charlotte learned dance in the first place? I said nothing, but my fingers slowly tightened. Victoria smiled coldly. After you ran away, your father went mad. He locked himself inside your mother's old dance studio for 3 days. And after that, he devoted everything he had to turning Charlotte into a dancer. From childhood, she learned every technique your mother once taught. She studied your mother's style. Her performances were built from your mother's choreography. And even her name was chosen deliberately by your father. Boom. It felt as though something exploded inside my mind. So it wasn't that he had forgotten my mother. Instead, he had chosen another daughter to replace me. Victoria watched the color drain from my face and finally smiled in satisfaction. You know, Charlotte has always been your father's greatest pride. He once said that even if you had stayed, you never would have surpassed her. Every word felt like a dull knife, slowly carving into my chest. But I remained silent, because people who are truly wounded often lose the energy to scream. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. A young woman in a white dress rushed toward us. Charlotte. The moment she saw the police officers, her expression changed instantly. Mom. She grabbed Victoria's arm. I told you not to come here. This is the academy. If this gets out, Dad will be furious. Victoria immediately switched to a wronged expression. Charlotte, I'm only doing this for you. Can't you see this woman is deliberately targeting you? Charlotte slowly turned toward me. Her eyes were already red. After a long silence, she bowed deeply. I'm sorry, Judge Evans. My family behaved inappropriately. From the beginning, it was simply my own failure. I paused slightly, because the girl standing in front of me had eyes far too clean, too sincere. Nothing about her resembled the Sinclair family. Victoria instantly exploded again. Why are you apologizing to her? Your performance was flawless. There's no way you deserve to fail. Charlotte clenched her hands tightly. Mom, please stop. Her voice was trembling badly, but Victoria either didn't notice or didn't care. All she cared about was preserving the Sinclair family's pride. I looked at the girl standing before me. Then for the first time, I asked her directly, do you truly want to know why you failed? Charlotte immediately looked up. Hope flickered in her tearful eyes. Yes, please teach me. I stepped closer to her. My voice was calm. Your technique isn't the problem. Your movements are nearly perfect. But you're missing one thing. A soul. The entire hallway fell silent. Charlotte froze. I looked directly into her eyes. From beginning to end, you've only been imitating someone else. You copied the style of a dead woman. You copied her so completely that you forgot who you are. Charlotte's face slowly turned pale. Her lips trembled faintly. I continued softly. Dance isn't a tool to prove your worth. And it isn't something meant to satisfy other people. If someone stands on stage without freedom in their eyes, then no matter how flawless they seem, they're nothing but an empty shell. Tears finally spilled from Charlotte's eyes, as though no one had ever said these things to her before. Victoria suddenly laughed coldly. What beautiful words. You're just jealous of her. You're afraid she'll surpass you. Afraid the Sinclair family finally produced a true genius. I slowly turned toward her, then smiled faintly. A genius? Do you know what's truly tragic? When I look at your daughter, I see myself from 20 years ago. Victoria's expression stiffened instantly. Even Charlotte stared at me in shock. For the first time, my gaze toward her softened. Back then, I was also forced to become the person others wanted. I also believed that if I became perfect enough, someone would finally love me. But later, I realized something. When a person loses themselves completely, then even if they gain everything, it still means nothing. Charlotte finally broke down crying. Standing in the crowded hallway, her shoulders shook uncontrollably as though she had been suffocating for years, and right at that moment, a deep male voice suddenly echoed from the end of the corridor. Claire, you've grown up. The moment that voice echoed through the hallway, everything fell silent. I slowly turned around. At the end of the corridor stood a man in a perfectly tailored black suit. Silver streaks lined his temples now, but the cold authority surrounding him had not changed at all. Edward Sinclair, my father. For 20 years, I had imagined this reunion countless times. I thought I would hate him, thought I would scream at him, thought I would finally break apart in front of him. But now that he was really standing here, all I felt was emptiness. A cold, hollow emptiness. Victoria's face immediately changed. Edward, she hurried toward him. I only wanted justice for Charlotte. I never expected this woman to. Enough. Edward cut her off sharply. Victoria froze instantly. Clearly, she had never expected him to scold her publicly. But Edward never looked at her. From beginning to end, his eyes remained fixed on me. After a long silence, he finally spoke. You've lost weight. I laughed softly. What a ridiculous opening sentence, as though the last 20 years had merely been a small argument between father and daughter. I looked at him calmly. Mr. Sinclair, this is an examination building. If you came here to reminisce, I don't believe we're close enough for that. The surrounding crowd visibly stiffened. No one had expected me to speak to Edward Sinclair like that. The most powerful man in North City. A man no one dared offend. Yet he didn't get angry, didn't rebuke me. He simply stared at me silently. His gaze was so complicated that I refused to understand it. Beside him, Charlotte looked completely lost. She glanced between the two of us, then asked shakily, Dad, you know Judge Evans? The atmosphere froze solid. Victoria's face turned pale. Charlotte, but it was already too late. Edward slowly closed his eyes, as though, after 20 years, he could no longer avoid the truth. He looked at his younger daughter, then spoke in a hoarse voice. She is your sister. Boom. The hallway erupted instantly. What? Judge Evans is part of the Sinclair family? Oh my God. Charlotte stood there completely frozen. Her lips trembled violently. Sister, she turned toward me slowly. So when you said I was imitating a dead woman, that woman was your mother? I didn't answer, but my silence was answer enough. Tears rolled down Charlotte's face one after another. She stumbled backwards slightly, as though the world she had believed in for 20 years had suddenly collapsed around her. Why? She looked at Edward. Why didn't you ever tell me? Edward clenched his fists tightly. For the first time in my life, he actually looked tired. I didn't know how. Victoria immediately panicked. Edward, that was all in the past. Why bring it up now? Edward slowly turned toward her. His gaze was terrifyingly cold. "Be quiet." Victoria froze. In 20 years, this was the first time he had ever looked at her that way. Then he turned back toward me. His voice was rough with regret. "Claire, I know, you've hated me all these years." I smiled faintly. "Hate? No." I met his eyes directly. When someone is completely disappointed, they no longer have the energy to hate. Edward's face instantly went pale, as though my words had stabbed directly into his chest. I continued calmly. "You were the one who tore up my acceptance letter. You were the one who watched me leave that house in the rain without stopping me. So tell me, Mr. Sinclair, what right do you have to stand in front of me now?" With every sentence, his face lost more color. The untouchable, powerful man before everyone else finally looked fragile. After a long silence, he spoke quietly. "I thought that if you ever came home, I could make up for everything." I laughed softly. The sound was quiet, but painfully cold. "Make up for it? Mr. Sinclair, do you know the cheapest thing in the world? A late apology." Edward Sinclair stood motionless, as though within only a few seconds he had suddenly aged 10 years. No one in the hallway dared to speak. The silence was suffocating. Victoria clenched her teeth tightly. She refused to accept this. For 20 years, she had worked desperately to erase the name Clara Sinclair from the Sinclair family. And now, the daughter who had disappeared long ago had returned stronger than ever, standing somewhere no one could ignore. Victoria stepped forward again. "Claire Evans. No, perhaps I should call you Clara Sinclair instead? You really think you're the victim here? If you hadn't been so obsessed with dancing back then, our family never would have fallen apart." I looked at her coldly, without saying a word. But somehow, that silence unsettled her more than anger ever could. Still, she forced herself to continue. "Your father only wanted what was best for you. The dance world is cruel. Wasn't your own mother proof of that?" The moment she mentioned my mother, Edward's expression changed instantly. "Enough!" His voice thundered through the hallway. Victoria flinched. Even I froze slightly, because in all these years, this was the first time he had ever raised his voice over my mother. Edward's hands trembled at his sides, veins stood sharply beneath his skin. "The person with the least right to speak about her is you." Victoria's face turned pale. What do you mean by that?" Edward slowly closed his eyes, then finally spoke the truth he had hidden for 20 years. "Back then, the person who forced Clara to give up dancing wasn't me." I froze completely. Edward looked directly at Victoria. "It was you." The hallway fell dead silent. Victoria immediately panicked. "Edward, what nonsense are you saying?" Edward gave a bitter laugh. "The night I got drunk, you brought Clara's acceptance letter to me. And you told me that if I truly loved you, I should let the past disappear forever." Victoria's hands began trembling. "You were the one who destroyed her ballet shoes. You were the one who locked her mother's dance studio. And you were the one who ordered the servants never to mention my late wife again." His voice grew rougher with every sentence, as though every word cut into him too. I stood there silently, my mind completely blank, because for 20 years, I had believed the person who destroyed my dream was my father, but he had never known the entire truth. Suddenly, Victoria screamed. "Yes, I did it! So what? That dead woman haunted this family even after she died. I was the legal wife, so why was everyone still obsessed with her?" Then she turned toward me viciously. "And you? Every time I looked at you, I was reminded that my husband never truly forgot her." Beside us, Charlotte suddenly burst into tears. "So all this time, you forced me to dance, not because you loved me, but because you wanted me to replace her?" Victoria froze. Charlotte stepped backward shakily. Tears streamed down her face. "I thought you were proud of me, but I was only a shadow you created to defeat someone who left 20 years ago." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Charlotte finally broke down sobbing. For the first time, the proud, elegant girl completely shattered, and Edward slowly turned back toward me. His eyes were filled with unbearable regret. "Clara, I'm sorry." This time, he didn't call me Claire Evans. He called me by the name buried 20 years ago. I stayed silent for a long moment, then finally answered softly, "But unfortunately, your daughter died 20 years ago." After saying that, I turned and walked away. Behind me, Charlotte's trembling voice suddenly called out, "Sister." I stopped walking, but I didn't turn around. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "If you truly love dancing, then dance for yourself. Don't become anyone's shadow anymore." The hallway lights stretched my shadow farther and farther ahead, and this time, I never looked back.